All right, thanks, Dick. Thanks, Nancy. So we did this at Midwest in Lexington last year, and it went pretty well. Basically what we did, to give you all some background, about 6 months or so ago, we sent a survey out to the Northeast Bridge Preservation Panel to get feedback on kind of what were the questions that were of interest to the owners and agencies within NEBPP. And so these are some of the questions that came up, and then we've got another slide if we have time. But long story short, we're just gonna kind of go through these questions, let each one of the panel members discuss, and then I'm standing down here so that if another state agency or vendor or whomever has a question or a thought, or hey, that's not the way we do it, that's the way we can do it differently in this state or whatever, just raise your hand and I'll run this over to you. So we'll go ahead, we'll start left to right. So we're gonna get started here. How has your agency used non-destructive testing and evaluation in the past?
Your left?
Okay. My left, but I'm looking this way.
Jim Flynn, New York State DOT. I kind of looked at this from different angles because we have the inspection program, bridge design program. We have a pretty good group of material specialists, so I kind of talked to all of them and kind of summarized it from different perspectives. We used to have a pretty good research group. Serena Vasallen probably knows that, who's sitting here, but that got discontinued due to cuts, and they used to do a lot of our NDE-NDT, so a lot of that stuff, the specialty stuff they used to do, we go out to the to consultants now. But in the bridge inspection program, you know, it's pretty basic. We do D-meter, dye penetrant to determine cracks, and you know, if we have cracks, we work through that from there. From the bridge, you know, rehabilitation end, predominantly we do like chain drag on the bridge decks and GPR, and we cross-reference those to determine the extent of the issues we have and the type of work we have to do. And then in our metals group, that's really where we do a lot of the NDT. We have a lot of bridge hits, a lot of steel bridges in New York State. We have a bridge hit probably more than once a week. We do a lot of metal repairs. So between the fabrication shop and our materials group, they have specialty in visual testing, dye penetrant, magnetic particle, ultrasonic, and radiographic in the fabrication shops. And our guys at New York State DOT go out in the field and do a lot of the welded repair checks to do ultrasonic testing and magnetic particle out in the field. So that's just a quick summary of a lot of the basic NDTs we're doing in New York State. We do, have a lot of one-offs where we have more reactionary. I know the first presentation NDT said a lot of the states are getting more progressive and kind of getting out ahead of the curve. I'd say we're still more reactionary. We have bridges where we have to put strain gauges on and monitor for movements because we have a perceived issue, and we're kind of monitoring for that. So we have a lot of that going on throughout the state as well.
So Louisiana used to be very reactionary with it, and about 6 or 7 years ago, I was told to, hey, you're gonna kick off our NDE program, do more with it, use it for bridge inspection. So I don't know how much anybody here knows about Louisiana, but we have like 18 of the top 20 longest bridges in the country. And these are signature bridges. They're not ever gonna be replaced. They might get added on to, but they're not going to be replaced. So preservation is a big deal, but we don't have to salt our roads and bridges in Louisiana. So nobody's really thought too much about, well, when do we need to start thinking about hydro-dim deck, partial deck replacements? Well, how the heck do you inspect the deck of a 2-lane, 20-mile-long bridge that has a twin structure? It's impossible. You're not going to do that without some sort of technology helping you. So prior to approaching that problem, one-offs like that New York mentioned, and we had a statewide UT pin testing for just our pin and hanger type girder assemblies that we had done. We had over almost 1,000 assemblies, I think, in the state. So we kicked that off, and that was really the biggest like statewide effort in inspection for pins. So then we approached the decks. We want to scan decks. We need to know what's wrong with the decks to even start to even think about programming which interstate bridges, causeway type bridges need to get a partial deck replacement first. Well, then with that came the NBE, correlating the data to condition states. So we've used consultants for all of this work. I've learned enough to just know how, what the data means. And the consultants presented in a very easy manner for anybody to understand. So we've done a pretty good job of trying to correlate the data that we get to the current NDE condition state defect codes. And it's an ongoing effort. It's a program at this point. And of course, all the reactionary stuff. We get a lot of truck fires on bridges, depending on the structure type, that leads to different methodologies that we might need our consultants to advise us on. So that's kind of us in a nutshell at the moment, and I'll answer. I'm sure some of the questions that we will follow and answer more on detail for that. All right, they got the right mic.
Got one right here. Well, I'm Rich Van Allen, I'm with TranSystems. Now, we're not an agency, so obviously our position is that we do a lot of bridge inspection. And the use of NDT is paramount to a lot of the work that we do. I mean, all our crews are trained and have capabilities, and what would be the run-of-the-mill NDT being the mag particle and the dye penetrant. But one of the key ones that we run into and that we're asked many a time to look at is pins. Now, we've already heard about the pins for the pin and hangers, but you got pins in trusses, especially on rail trusses where they're 100, 120 years old or more, and you need to know what is going on inside, and it's totally blind to you. You've got many diagonals and cord members that come together. You can't see it. You can't see anything. And the use of the ultrasonic on the pins gives you a good idea of what's going on, and it gives you the ability to repeat your data the next time you're out there as well.
Great. Jason?
Jason Arndt, Delaware DOT. So for our routine inspections, some of the technologies that we use, or some of the methods, for steel, dye penetrant, mag particle, D meters, ultrasonic testing. For concrete, mostly concrete decks, obviously chain drags, hammer sounding, but we also do impact echo. We do that. We're trying to do that every 5 years on our bridge decks. And then we'll also do some infrared too. We have an infrared camera that we use. We kind of use that more for pre-screening, so for finding some, significant amount of DLAM just by random sampling through a routine inspection, but we don't necessarily have lane closures going on. We might come back with the infrared camera to kind of pre-screen and to see if we want to do another round of impact echo. Is it enough? Does it look like enough to take the next step, or close the lanes and actually do a chain drag for the bridge? Except for the chain drag and the dye penetrant testing, everything else is done through a vendor. We don't really have that expertise in-house. For the vendors, we typically do that, so we have an open-in inspection contract. That consultant typically will have a vendor that will, the consultant themselves can do a lot of the stuff, like they have staff that's trained in the mag particle, ultrasonic testing, but like the impact echo for our decks, we get a third-party vendor that is like a sub to the consultant. So for the data that we get from that, it's obviously, it's the inspection data. It's used in the bridge preservation program. I mean, we use that data to properly assess the steel elements, the concrete elements. That information and data is used when we run our modeling and deterioration modeling and forecasting out for our bridge program. And just basically it helps get a more detailed, accurate assessment of those elements, so we can properly code them for the MBI component ratings. For design projects, we also use some NDT as well. We just had a recent project where it was an old concrete filled arch. We have some issues from the underneath side of the arch. We use GPR on that. think we used impact echo, impulse echo. I feel like I'm missing a one. But we used a handful of different electrical resistivity we used as well. Try to get a better idea as to the condition of that concrete to kind of help us decide what we want to do. We had another project earlier this year, used all the similar technology. I see us moving forward, at least on the design side. So typically when we get, when a bridge comes up for work and we're trying to evaluate whether to replace it or major rehab or what we want to do, we'll usually do a design level inspection that's outside of our routine inspection program. That's done through our bridge design section and program. Our bridge design section, they have, I think, 3 or 4 consultants, open-end consultant agreements. Some of those consultants have some of that technology themselves. If not, they'll get a third-party vendor as well. But I see us using that technology more and more because, you know, as we're getting to some of these bridges, it's not really clear, you know, should we replace it? Should we just rehab it? So, I mean, you know, just from the typical routine visual inspection, it's not enough necessarily to really know what you need to do. So you need to kind of do a more in-depth look at it. So I can see us using NDT more and more for our design projects. I think I answered everything else. So that's it for Delaware.
Tripp, Shenton, University of Delaware. Obviously, I'm not an owner, but the reason I volunteered to sit on the panel is that we had an NCHRP synthesis project, which finished up about 2 years ago, which was on load rating bridges and culverts that were missing or had incomplete information. So it was all about how do you deal with those structures where you're missing information, and so of course NDT comes into play for that. For that project, we did a survey, a national survey of all the state agencies, asking them if they use NDT. We got a 92% response rate, so we got a good response on the survey, and from just the one question of do you use NDT to gather information, you know, if you're missing it, and just over 50% of the states said yes, they do. We didn't ask specifically whether you do this with in-house forces or whether you contract for it, but presumably they were answering, I assumed, for, you know, whether they do it at all. So just over half said they were using it. We also asked them what technologies they were using. Probably we gave them a laundry list of about 18 or more technologies. The ones that came up high on the list, you probably could name most of them, but, you know, chain drag, dye penetrant, GPR, you know, those were the top ones. There were some other ones, you know, that did seem to be being used, but of course those key top ones are being used by a lot of people. But the obvious things, the situations where they're missing plans, they don't know where rebar is, they don't know what size, they don't know what, you know, cover depths are, things like that. So those were probably the most common instances where, you know, the NDT is being used for that application. So just a little information from kind of somewhat of a national perspective.
Great, thanks everybody. Are there any other agencies in the audience that would like to speak up about how they're trying to use NDT&E as opposed to what we've heard from Northeast? Or any questions for the panel on this particular point of what's been used, how it's been used, that kind of thing?
Somebody in the back.
I have one question. So you're saying that nearly 50% of the states said they're not using NDT at all?
Right, it was like, yeah, I think it was 52, 55% said they were using some NDT. Right.
That tracks.
Any NDT?
It was a pretty basic question, yeah.
Maybe it should have been, do you know what NDT is? That's right.
The report's free and it's online, so you can find it. It has all the survey data in there, so you can see for yourself if you want more of the details.
Lindsay. Question was,
Yeah,
is that a
I
funding
don't.
or an education issue?
Yeah, maybe some of the owners might have.
About why they're not doing NDT?
Yeah.
This
Well,
is
I mean,
perfect.
Is it-
Tac-
Rid of my
Tactile,
second page of
tactile's
questions.
NDT, so I think they are and don't realize it. And, you know, I'm not sure otherwise. We have the funding to do it, and we do it in New York State, so I'm not sure why the other states aren't otherwise.
I've been involved on some NDE, just committee type things over the years. Most states, it's a generational thing. They don't like the technology. That's what it is. And it's just they're used to how they do things, and they don't see, you know, if they got burned real bad on a GPR scan in the 1980s, they hold that grudge. And before we even did the pin and hanger project across the state, I think our first dive really into NDE, outside of the typical bridge inspection, dye penetrant, D meters, that kind of thing, was our unknown foundation project with pile testing. We have a lot of timber piled bridges in Louisiana. We're a deep foundation state, but we had no pile driving records. And so we had to use that technology to give us an embedment length so we could at least do a scour analysis. And I've had states over the years call me, oh, you did this, did it work? And we threw in, obviously we're gonna throw in known pile at bridges, and the data came back matching. So I really think it's just states get scared to try it, or they don't know what they need to try it on. Like, what is your problem? Maybe NDE could help you with that problem. So it could be that as well.
That's a good point, Haylye. A lot of times when we're designing NDE or structural monitoring systems, when the owner doesn't necessarily know the problem they're trying to solve or enough about the technology, it gets mixed up of, well, how can we apply this technology correctly to get to this solution? So working with the owners, or even in-house, if you have folks that are in-house doing it, can allow you to use the right technology to get the right answer. All right, so moving on, can we talk about specifically what you're trying to get out of testing and evaluation with regards to preservation?
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to touch on too. Somebody mentioned the infrared camera, and we did just circling back first, if that's okay, but we did have a research project we did with Glenn Washer, and you know, we tested out the camera, and you know, we found it was quite difficult to utilize the camera to really, you know, time it right to get the differential temperatures to really map out your bridge decks. And the substructures were not in the sunlight, so it was really good actually for checking out your house, though, if you want to see where you're losing heat. But like on the bridges, we were kind of skeptical. But you know, I'm seeing now Glenn Washer at AASHTO this year showed that they were doing like stationary poles, and they're doing like time lapse with it. And I talked to a gentleman yesterday who's doing it with drones. They go up, they recharge, they go up. I think there is big potential there if you can do it that way. Just walking around with a camera, we didn't really feel it was very viable, but there is potential there as well. In terms of what we're looking for, in the inspection program, when we went to AASHTO Element, which you know, it's quantity based, we found our inspectors are spending a lot of time on that. If we could utilize NDT to really map out quantities a lot easier than have them out there measuring, that would be a huge advantage, and they would be able to expend their time more wisely or more efficiently on the more serious matters than mapping out quantities to get the exact numbers. So we'd certainly look for it there. One thing I'd say we're particularly not good at in New York State, and I think we're good at a lot of things, but we're not good at mapping out how much concrete we have to take off in rehabilitations. I think one of the presentations showed you hammer out, I think it was Bill, and you know, you kind of map out, you know, you map it out with your hammer, what doesn't sound good. In New York, we say go ahead and double that, you know, because you know, the red part you showed there, that's additional concrete you're going to end up taking out. But I think we could do a lot better job of that, just in general in our rehabilitations. We're generally doing that about a year ahead, you know, when they're actually out there doing the work. So a lot of times our quantities are way off, and we really, I think, could do a much better job in New York on that, and really help out the contractors as well in the ICs in the field, because we get out in the field and we'll map out, you know, a little area, then we'll see half the columns missing when we get out there because there's so much concrete gone. So I think we could really use help in that end of it.
So I touched upon our major issues with our really long bridges and not having great data on the deck. And so we've worked with our consultants to provide data and to provide it to fit in with the current MBE condition states, and that's all for programming. But to touch upon your issue with the quantities, we've had, like I said, we have a lot of long elevated roadway, and we have a lot of commerce. So truck fires are just a thing in Louisiana. And most of the time, it's just the deck that gets damaged. Sometimes it spreads and it ends up under the bridge. But we'll use our consultants to go out and scan the deck of the damaged portion. And it's really just to give us like a potential for a full depth blowout, because typically we'll just go in and do some hydrodim and then down to the first layer of steel. But it's the full depth blowouts that occur during that hydrodim that drive up the cost. And we tried it on the Chaffalaya Basin Bridge, and the consultant gave us a map, and they gave us quantities and showed us the areas where you could possibly have a blowout in these areas. And we based the estimate off of that, and we came in, we had no change orders from it. And lucky enough that we didn't even have any full depth blowouts on that project. But we've we take little opportunities like that to utilize the technology and then compare it to the results that we end up with when we go to fix it. And I think if you start doing things like that, then maybe you get more confident with what these technologies can bring to the table for your agency.
Great. Rich?
Yes. Okay, well, looking at it as far as preservation goes, now, we're a consultant, so, and we're not an agency, we're not an owner, but we are charged with providing information that will aid whatever agency we are working for to make a wise decision, to show what the proposed or prospective lifespan is of what is left of the structure, and utilizing NDT to do that. Well, primarily, again, of course, you're looking at structure steel. You're going to use a D-meter to determine how much loss you really have, rather than just making some visual assumption. Again, with the pins, I hate to talk about pin and hangers because I'm from Connecticut. But we go about, you're gonna use ultrasonic testing to assess the condition of that pin and to be assured that there are no defects that are gonna cause a catastrophic failure. Now, whether that's in a pin and a hanger or a pin and a truss. And with trusses, you've got to look at, no one wants to have to replace a pin in the truss. It's much too difficult and too time-consuming and too expensive. But you need to know what kind of life you have left in it, so you can make a good decision on what you're going to do for the scope of that structure.
Great, thank you. Jason?
Similar to what the others had said, we're basically just looking for a more accurate assessment of the bridge, whether it's to determine the best path forward for a project for a particular bridge, whether it's rehab or replacement, or evaluating different options for that, or just the routine inspection program, having a more accurate assessment of the bridge to better assign the component ratings. That way, to be used for our annual prioritization process, and then also our modeling and forecasting asset management program.
Yeah, just from the perspective of load rating, it's, if information is missing, you've got to either make some judgment on what you think it is, maybe from some historical data or information that you have based on when the bridge was built. But if not, then you've got to try to employ whatever technology you can to come up with a reasonable idea of concrete, what's in there, where's the rebar, how much, all those kind of things. And so that's how the states would be using it.
So there was discussion on infrared. So New York, you guys used handhelds. Jason, I know you guys have had relative success with handhelds as well as some limitations. Philip, you're going to get called on here. You want to give Wisconsin's perspective on infrared for the audience?
You couldn't help yourself, huh? Yeah, I guess in Wisconsin we have a pretty extensive, I call it monitoring program, where every 4 to 5 years we'll do a scan of our bridge decks, just so we have an idea of where all of our bridges are at, how we can project out into the future about what work needs to be done. When I evaluated what we were doing in the past with chain drag, visual, and the results we're getting with thermography now and correlating actual deck prep to projects, it was actually performing better than what we had been doing in the past. So we've had pretty good success with thermography. It's a really cost-effective solution for us. So just want to throw that out there, I guess.
Point to make, just the difference there, and this is what I wanted to talk about. It sounds like you all were using handhelds cameras. Philip, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's either aerial or truck mounted.
Yeah, thank you. It reminded me of another point I wanted to make. We found, vast differences between different contractors, right? So contractor experience and their willingness to go out there and maybe take another scan, right, if the first scan didn't turn out well. Having enough experience to know, hey, I'm going through a concrete overlay on this bridge, so I'm going to wait till the afternoon to do the IR. If it's a bare deck, sure, I'll take those, earlier in the day. But having that experience, knowing the different geometries of bridges, how that affects the readings, a lot of different ways that you can screw up that analysis. So.
Great, thanks. So that kind of brings, it sounds like we talked a little bit about this, but just to verify, New York sounds like you all have some reasonable experience in-house, but when you do contract it, how do you contract that work?
Well, I guess, again, there's varying ways we do it. In our inspection program, the vast bulk of our program is consultants, so just by that nature, if we need more sophisticated NDT, we'll do it, through those contracts, and they can either do it with their in-house staff or bring in specialists to do, what's beyond the typical D-meter and dye penetrant tests. And again, for the decks, actually, for bridge decks, we purchased a system that we're supposed to be able to use on a moving vehicle, but during COVID, it got buried behind everything else, and we haven't got up to speed on it yet because we need the vendor to come in and get that going. So our hope is that we can have in-house staff help us with doing GPR of the decks with a movable system on a van. Otherwise, we do go to vendors for that to assist us with, again, we have major viaducts as well, so we'll get involved with having the vendors come in and do the mapping for us in those scenarios.
And is that typically procured based on qualifications or cost?
Yeah, it's a combo usually. We want good qualifications. We want to know we're getting a good product out of it, and cost always plays into everything we do. So,
Louisiana.
Most of our NDE is contracted out, and we do it through qualifications, and it's really just because the technology is improving at such a fast pace. I don't think it's worth it for us to invest too much in the technology, because we can't dedicate somebody to be an expert in it all and stay on top of the changes, because you'd have to constantly update all your tools. So that's why we contract out, and we like to have at least 2 IDIQ contracts based on qualifications to perform various services in NDE.
All right, so I'll skip to Delaware, next agency.
So mostly, except for dye penetrant and chain drag, and everything's done through, can you hear me? Okay. Everything's done through our consultant. In our bridge inspection manual, we actually have some qualifications for some of the different technologies, what's required of the inspector to be certified to be doing that type of work.
Any questions on this stuff that we've gone over, or comments? Dick? question.
use my bridge inspection program to pay for it.
Any
Yeah,
other
we
questions?
can use federal funding for it as part of the evaluation process through the inspection program.
Federal funding.
All right. Any other comments, questions for the panel? All right, so we'll wrap up a little early, but before we go, Amir from Infratech is going to tell us about an NCHRP study real quick, and hopefully be able to get some more state participation for NDT.
Sounds good, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amir Rezvani with Infratech Solutions. It's just a quick announcement that I want to make. We were recently awarded a TRB grant that is sponsored by NCHRP, and the title of the research for this grant is NDE triggers for early preservation of bridge decks. And pretty much as the title says, we are looking at predominantly 3 different NDE technologies to actually use them to look at recently constructed bridges that, for example, as part of this research were constructed this year, 2022 and 2021, and see when and where and by using which types of NDE technologies we are able to find different triggers that are telling us that, hey, something is happening to this bridge deck, and we would better act fast when it is easy to take care of the problem and it is actually cheap to take care of that problem. So we are mostly looking at hairline surface crack mapping, a specific type of GPR survey, as well as infrared thermography to actually measure surface evaporation of water. We have a few great state DOT partners, Delaware being one of them, Wisconsin, Vermont, and Iowa. We are actually looking for more state partners to actually join us, especially in the Northeast. Our company is based out of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So what we would like to happen is to minimize our travel costs for field deployment and field data collection, and spend more on literally data collection, so less on travel, more on data collection. So if any of the Northeast states, Pennsylvania, for example, New Hampshire, any other one of the states that are here and are interested in this research topic, please find me, let's talk, we're going to onboard you, and hopefully we can get a few of bridges from you that are recently constructed and add them to the data collection list for this research. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to actually answer them once we actually talk after this session. Thank you very much.
Okay, I have tried to be quiet during the NDE and NDT because I tend to talk too much. But I do think that to Mary Beth's comment about what states use NDE, NDT, I think it is the terminology, and Haylye mentioned something about, people like if you're a little more old school, not quite, don't feel so techie, they think of NDE and NDT as just these really high-tech technologies, but there are so many things that are non-destructive technologies that you use, and all states really use them, even if it's, to her point, chain dragging.
Well, technically, everyone here has done NDE because visual testing is non-destructive
exactly.
testing.
Exactly. So, I mean, the visual is the first and foremost, right? And so, so I think that might be one of the hardest things to get past with talking about NDE and NDT. What is that, and how do we kind of destigmatize maybe that? And then also, how do you make it less of a voodoo science, which it seems everybody has this, like was mentioned, the idea that you've done something in the past and someone promised you something that they should never have promised you they could do with their technology, and it didn't work, and so you're done with it. And that, again, is very common in DOTs. We don't like to spend money without getting something from it, right? And once you do that, then it's off the table. So I think probably everybody that works at a DOT that's in here or has worked at a DOT understands that. So I think that's one of the biggest things, and I think we need to keep talking about it and keep talking about, how we're improving and what you can do with it and what it really is.
One thing, Haylye, that you mentioned about the doing validation and even just comparing it back to, hey, we didn't get any change orders. I think that hearing more about that from state DOTs would be very powerful. And you know, it's all about education. One thing that we do with AS&T is promote the education of NDE and NDT. And the more we know about it, obviously, the more you understand, or the agency or the owner understands with regards to what I should be looking for validation and what that validation should look like. You know, am I looking for a 10% hit rate or a 50% hit rate or whatever that is? And getting into overrun, underrun data. If you're doing better than just saying it's double, is that good enough, right? So, any thoughts from the panel? Or anyone else in the audience, in fact?
I just think it would be interesting to see the states that don't think they're doing NDT and see what their participation rate is in the partnership.
That's an interesting question. Correlation, maybe, huh?
Yeah. Is it correlation or causation?
Be careful. Okay, I know everyone, unless anyone, I mean, we can stay here all day. I have no problem with that, but, no? Stephen, you don't have anything to add? I'm calling you out.